Imagine you work security at a government facility so classified you don't even know the full layout, but you know your floor and you know your clearance and you know where you're not allowed to go. And then one night you step into your elevator like you always do. You press the button that you always press to get down to your floor, but this time something strange happens. The elevator doesn't stop, it keeps going. Level 2, level 3, level 4, and suddenly you realize that this place isn't just an underground facility, it goes deep. And by the time the doors open, you find yourself on what they call level 7. And what you see there when the doors finally open, it's not weapons, it's not aircraft, and it's certainly not some normal Cold War military project. You see tanks filled with strange, bubbling yellow liquid. You see glass chambers. You see rows and rows of bodies. And while you are standing there trying to soak all of this in for the first time, standing there in shock, standing there and not believing what you are seeing, you realize something. Some of the bodies that you're looking at are not human. Some are, but some are not. Then you squint your eyes and you look a bit closer and you realize that some of these bodies that aren't human are children? Children that look almost human, but not completely. What you're looking at are creatures suspended in this weird liquid that's bubbling and fizzing at the top of the tank. You look to your left and you see people behind glass that look confused, maybe drugged, some even mutilated. And somewhere in the middle of this is a rumor that will haunt the UFO community for the rest of time. A rumor that beneath a quiet town in New Mexico, the US government and non-human beings are running a joint genetic experiment. Not an experiment, a breeding program. Not a breeding program, a hybrid program. A program designed to create something between them and us. And the scariest part of this whole thing is how many details came out of eyewitness accounts from this entire conspiracy. Allegedly. Welcome to the Dulce Base. Oh my goodness, you guys, we are on a roll. Okay, so before we get into this whole crazy ass base, right? I want to go over a few things. Few housekeeping things. If you are looking for more spicy alien content, I did just set up a subscription for the spiciest alien on my Instagram. If you would like to see more exclusive bits for that type of content, please head there. If you would like an extra episode of Spicy Alien After Dark during the week, if you want 2 episodes a week, I highly suggest you subscribe to the Spotify tier. That will really start discussions on what you guys want to hear more of and which way we can take this podcast. I'm really excited about it. I also want to thank everybody who listened to my last episode. I genuinely am in shock at how many people are truly liking this type of content. This is my bread and butter. I love conspiracies. And the fact that you guys want to listen to this type of conspiracy content, I'm floored and happy. And also I want to make sure it's the best type of content I can put out there. So the fact that you guys have been giving me such great feedback, I'm thrilled. One of you are really upset that I'm holding this little mic. I ordered a new one, okay? Be nice to me. It's coming. It's in the mail. It's on its way here. Boob shake for you, though, because you're looking out for me, and I love you so much. Welcome to Spicy Alien After Dark. Let's get into the details of the Dulce Base, episode number 3. Let's fucking go. Okay, so before we get into the aliens, the underground wars, and the hybrid children, we need to start with the place itself. And I have a lot of information on the screen in front of me, so that's kind of what I'm going to be referencing this entire time. Don't judge me. I'm still a new podcaster. I will evolve. But for right now, this is what this looks like. Dulce, New Mexico. not Arizona, New Mexico. It is a small town near the Colorado border, connected to the Apache Nation and watched over by a flat top mountain called Archuleta Mesa. We're not talking about Area 51. This is not Roswell. It's not the most obvious sci-fi desert base with like all of the warning signs and armed guards and fences. That's not what this place looks like at all. But that's what makes it a little bit creepier. Because the real facility is just underground. You can't see anything. So from the surface, it looks like a normal little town in New Mexico. Highly deceiving. Everything we're going to talk about today is all underground, minus a few details. But according to this conspiracy, this legend of this base, hidden below the Archuleta Mesa is a massive multi-level underground facility jointly operated by humans and extraterrestrials. And the most common version of this conspiracy says that it has 7 levels. That's what makes the Dulce conspiracy theory the Dulce conspiracy theory, is that this base has 7 levels, all underground, and each level is darker than the last. Okay. And we'll get into those levels in a little bit. The rumors include genetic labs, mind control research, MK Ultra, alien housing, okay, human prisoners, hybrid children, underground tunnels, and a war between military personnel and alien beings. Off to a hot start, if you ask me. Now, obviously, the US government has not come out and confirmed any of these claims, but that's what makes it the most baller conspiracy theory I've ever heard of. And we're going to get into some really famous people who have made comments about this base, so stick around. This conspiracy is pretty old and sticky, but the best part about it is that it is weirdly specific, which is why people say that there's no way we're being lied to about this by eyewitness accounts, because people are coming out and saying such specific things that there's no way it's a lie. Claims about Dulce began circulating around a man called Paul Bennewitz in the late 1970s, early 1980s. And Paul Bennewitz actually became convinced that he had discovered alien activity in a secret underground base near Dulce. That's where this starts, okay? And the part that matters is that Dulce did not become famous because somebody saw a UFO. Dulce became famous because multiple nightmares collided all in the same story. Because there was government secrecy, nuclear testing, alien abduction stories were coming out a lot. There was a ton of Cold War paranoia, kind of like similar to the MK Ultra situation, and the birthplace of cattle mutilation. There was also an idea floating around Dulce at the time that something was being done with human bodies without consent. That's why this conspiracy theory has lasted as long as it has without being like debunked, so to speak, because it's not just a classic alien story. This is a full-blown horror story straight out of the movies. But this started with the cattle. The cattle were the first to tip people off that something was going wrong here. Before the hybrid children, before level 7 was even mentioned, before this alleged alien war took place, there were cows. This was New Mexico. This was just that type of area where there was a lot of land, beautiful land, and there were generations of farmers on this land. Now, in the 1970s, New Mexico was one of those places where cattle mutilation stories became part of the UFO folklore. Like I mentioned earlier, this is the birthplace of this type of story. The cattle mutilation story that goes hand in hand with UFO conspiracy theories that you hear about today all started from Dulce, New Mexico. Ranchers and investigators started reporting animals found dead with strange surgical looking wounds. They had missing organs, removed eyes. What? Their tongues were removed, and reproductive organs were missing. And on top of all of that, very, very little blood found at the scenes. They were either drained of all of their blood, or the only bits of blood that were found could be explained by like predators that came to the scene after everything was said and done and kind of scavenged a bit. Now, with that being said, a lot of skeptics were saying that the cattle mutilations could be explained by predators or things like insects, or even the cow had been laying there for a while. So decomposition and scavenging took place before the bodies of the cattle were found. Basically, they were saying like, you guys are panicking over nothing. You're making a mountain out of a molehill. This is not something supernatural. This is just normal. This is life. When you're talking about ranchers, generational ranchers who have been on land for almost a million years, these are families that have been doing this for the longest time. They know what predator attacks look like. They know the area. They know the animals. They know what they're looking at. If a cow has been attacked by coyotes or wolves, you can tell, you can see. And these ranchers were offended by people coming in and saying, oh, it's just this, it's just that. And the ranchers would be like, no, coyotes don't just melt eyeballs out of the skull. They don't just take the tongue. There are instincts that these animals go off of, and none of those instincts are present in the actual bodies that are found. You cannot tell by looking at the cattle that this was clearly a coyote or a wolf or whatever that is, right? That's the point here. And because of this, then investigators that were starting to be on the side of the ranchers were saying, yeah, this is weird. These don't seem like normal deaths in the cattle. This isn't just life. This isn't a lifespan coming to an end. It looks like samples are being taken. It looks like biological material is being taken to be tested and experimented on. So that became the subject. Test subjects. And Dulce had one major figure connected to that part of the story, an investigator called Gabe Valdez. He was a New Mexico State police officer who had investigated cattle mutilation cases in the region as they started happening. Some versions of this story claim that Valdez actually found evidence that made him suspect something beyond ordinary criminal cases or just ordinary animal scavenging. When I say evidence that made him suspect something more, we're not talking about like, that's a strange fingerprint over there. No. Valdez actually reported seeing cattle mutilations that looked like a fetus had been placed inside of the cow, but they looked like a human monkey frog hybrid. That's the type of evidence we're talking about that Valdez is claiming that he sees when he goes to investigate these cattle mutilations. Again, this is not verified, but the detail became part of the Dulce nightmare because it connects all of the cattle mutilations to the actual hybridization rumors and the actual base itself. And don't forget, when you have an authority figure like a state police officer saying, yes, I saw this, I went to these ranches and I found this and I saw this, the people are going to trust you. This is a state police officer, and the town is going, what's going on here? And the police officer saying, yes, I saw this. So you can imagine this stirs up quite the ruckus within the town itself. Now, adding on top of this, another layer, another level, if you will, near Dulce, the US government actually did detonate nuclear devices underground. So in 1967, there was a project that the US government carried out called Project Gas Buggy, which detonated a 29 kiloton nuclear device underground in New Mexico as part of a program that was exploring, quote, peaceful uses for nuclear explosions. Hello? The Department of Energy's fact sheet actually places the gas buggy site about 12 miles outside of Dulce, right around that Archuleta Mesa. Okay. Moving on. So now imagine that you are a local in the 1970s and you are in this town where cattle are being found mutilated. The government has already previously exploded nuclear devices underground nearby. And on top of that, the military isn't telling you shit. The military secrecy is everywhere. You know they're there, but they're not telling you why they're there or for what reason they are making space underground. Now you're the citizen in this town, and all you want to do is go out to a bar and blow off some steam. You're paranoid about the future of the country. You're worried about nuclear explosions or even bombs being dropped on you from other countries at any given point in time. All you want to do is go out to a bar, have a drink, and get your mind off of things for a little bit. And you go in that bar, and the entire town is also there trying to do the same thing, except they're all talking about the cattle being mutilated. What if it's not by aliens? What if it is the US government? And What if the cattle are being tested because of something the US government did? This is where paranoia turns into a mob, because this is where Dulce becomes more than just a flying saucer story. It becomes a combination of everything. Because the town is so stirred up by all of these things going on at the same time, it's now about contamination, radiation, biological sampling, a cover up that's happening. And then here we go again, the rumor mutates. And because people believe animals are being tested, the next question is, why are they testing? What are they testing? Why are they taking the cows? What's next? Enter Paul Bennewitz. Paul Bennewitz is not some random guy screaming on a street corner about the second coming of Christ, okay? He was an Albuquerque businessman, extremely respected, and he was an electronics expert. The man knew his shit when it came to electricity, electronics, technology, stuff like that. He lived near the Kirtland Air Force Base in around 1979. He became convinced he was picking up some strange electronic signals, and he also started seeing strange lights near sensitive military areas. Benowitz thought that he was watching aliens. That was his storyline, that was his rhetoric. He thought that he was observing aliens. But what was actually happening was he was watching the military, and the military was watching him back. Because according to some government employees at the time that eventually started to whistleblow, Benowitz believed that he was intercepting alien communications, and he eventually concluded that there was an underground alien human base near Dulce. And his claims started to appear in the public eye around the 1980s. Now, later on, some government employees will step forward and say that Benowitz was not being ignored by anybody, but he was actually being fed false information by the government to essentially throw people off the trail. And this is told by a man named William Moore. Now, William Moore was linked with the US government. We do not know in what capacity, but he claimed that he actually was part of the team that helped feed Benowitz the false information to distort what the town was learning about or hearing about. And Moore actually took it a step further, claiming that they were given the directive to drive Benowitz crazy in order to discredit him. And so people wouldn't believe what he was saying anymore. And they succeeded, because Paul Bennewitz's mental health deteriorated so badly that he was eventually hospitalized. Here's where we come to a fork in the road here, because there are two very real possibilities that took place at this point in time. Possibility number one is that Benowitz discovered something real, and the people like Benjamin Moore that are stepping forward are claiming they made him look crazy, but what he discovered was real. The second possibility is that Benowitz discovered classified military activity, and the alien story was used to distract him until he just broke down mentally. Either way, it's still very disturbing, because now we're talking about how this base was, or the question of the existence of this base was being weaponized against people to make them look crazy, to throw everyone off track. And now we're looking at this story through a sort of cracked mirror. You think about the US government, and you think, like, would they ever do something like that? Did you listen to the last episode? The US government does some fuck ass shit. Always. And so this is not hard for me to believe. Again, we all have our own opinions, but yeah, I could absolutely see the US government doing shit like this. Couple more really important people that we have to talk about here in this one. And one of those people's name is Myrna Hansen. Now, according to this whole conspiracy rabbit hole, Hansen claimed that she witnessed strange objects in the sky above Dulce and cattle physically being taken up off the field. What? She says that she watched cattle being lifted into the sky by strange lights and then just hauled off in a type of beam that looked like it had no gravity. Remember how we were talking about how a lot of the UFO community lore kind of intersects at the story, right? So now we're going to get into hypnosis, because a lot of people who are taken or claim to be taken by aliens or have abduction stories, claim to later know what happened to them because they undergo hypnosis. Now, if you were to look into hypnosis, you can deduce that it is actually really, really good for human beings. It can help with things like addiction. Maybe you want to quit cigarettes. Maybe you need help with schooling, or you are going through a hard time and you need to pass some trauma. It goes on and on. The uses for hypnosis can be just about for anything, really. People started using hypnosis as a form of figuring out what, how, when, where, why they were taken by aliens and for what purpose, so that they could try to spark their memory into the missing time that people were experiencing while they were taken. Okay? So people were going under hypnosis to find out what was going on with them, to them, by the beings that were taking them when they couldn't remember. So that's what Myrna Hansen ended up doing. She was claiming that she got taken at one point after seeing all of these things happen to the cattle. And while she was under hypnosis, her story expanded. And she claims that she remembers being taken into an underground base where she recalls flashes of body parts, vats, abduction imagery, being her physically being lifted off the ground. She says that she remembers being implanted with something behind her ear, and she remembers very clearly non-human beings. This is important because so much of the UFO abduction lore from this era involves hypnosis, and it becomes a thing. It becomes a tool that people use around abduction witnesses or abductees. And obviously, hypnosis is controversial even to this day, but the claim is that people can use it to recover memories. People can also be influenced under hypnosis. So that's where the skepticism comes in, because people will say a story can be shaped by the questions that are being asked while you're under hypnosis. If somebody goes under hypnosis and describes a terrifying underground facility of sorts, is that a memory or is it a dream? Would it be a false memory? Could it be a story that was implanted by fear? Does the brain do some weird stuff? That's what we're looking at, right? But for a majority of Dulce, Hansen's account became one of the first glimpses into the underground base. So they were taking it as fact because now we have some tangible physical evidence that we could see in somebody through somebody else's brain that the base exists and this is what it looks like and this is what is in there. So when Hansen goes throughout the town to tell her story, she's talking about how she saw bodies in vats. She was talking about medical experimentation. She was talking about implants being placed into people, aliens taking biological material, and obviously the big one, a hidden underground facility, which people started drawing conclusions to from the explosions that the U.S. government were doing, from the nuclear activity that was going on there before, and because of all the lights in the sky and the activity that people were seeing. Now, there's a few people that enter at this point that make the Dulce Base hard to ignore in terms of science. Thank you to a man called Thomas Costello. Now, Costello was a security officer, remember the beginning, who worked inside the Dulce Base. He allegedly had clearance, but not to the deepest parts of the base. He claimed that the elevator at one point took him to a floor that he did not have clearance to, and he didn't realize until he was on the floor itself. So he had an experience down there. Once those doors opened up, he saw things that he didn't want to talk about, but he knew he had to do something. So what he actually ended up doing, according to the conspiracy, is that he started taking pictures, he started writing documents, and he started getting video of what was going on down there. So this security guard somehow got documentation, pictures, video evidence of what was going on in the Dulce Base. And the compilation of all of this documentation became known as the Dulce Papers, and they started circulating throughout the entire UFO community at the time in Dulce. But here's the problem. No one has ever been able to prove that Thomas Costello existed. There are no verified employment records. There's no authenticated documentations, no confirmed photos of this man. There's no birth certificate. There is no physical evidence that proves this man was real. It's almost like Thomas became part of the legend himself, because what he documented was, according to the Dulce papers, he documented each level in the base. And the levels are as follows. Level 1, security and surface operations. This is where your reception is. This is where you might see some offices or some cubicles. There's probably a printer and a fax machine. Phones are ringing. Pretty typical office setting, and probably just a lot of organization to be done. Level 2, staff living quarters. Now, a lot of what was said about the Dulce base is that the US government had scientists from other countries that they wanted to keep safe at these bases. So there were living quarters for them. They wanted to make sure that these scientists were loyal to the US government and that they weren't outside, they weren't operating anything elsewhere. No conflict of interest, essentially, is what the US government wanted for these scientists. So they kept them in living quarters. And level 2. Level 3, executive offices and labs. Now we're rolling out the big guns here, because if you're a captain, if you know some stuff, you're most likely on level 3. It is one of the higher ranking classifications, I guess, and only executive men could enter, and also scientists that were really high up the totem pole. Basically, the people who are running the game exist on level 3 within these executive offices, and the scientists that are in their personal labs. Level 4 is where we start to take a fat fucking U-turn into what the fuck territory, because level 4 was dedicated to mind control research and human aura experiments. Pause there for just a second. Let's take a minute to absorb what that means. Mind control research. We already talked about this. MK Ultra was a huge thing back in the day. They have, to this day, have not stopped doing that. Okay? So MK Ultra, we kind of have an understanding of what is going on with mind control. They are probably feeding people drugs and trying to figure out how to destroy one's mind or one's personality in order to rebuild it and make essentially sleeper cells. Human aura experiments, this is now on a soul level. This is the US government trying to understand and be able to control human souls, be able to extract a soul and place it somewhere else. Any of this sound familiar, Hollywood? Okay. That's what that means. Human aura, it's very energetic. We're talking about metaphysics. Okay. Level 5. Hello? Alien housing. Sure, the US government has apartment buildings underground for aliens. And yet, the veterans on the street have to beg for food. Can we be so fucking for real, US government? You are paying for alien housing, but y'all don't want to take care of your own. So we got fucking Alf and Wally on level 5 just fucking hanging out, okay? Level 6, genetic research. This is where the two come together. This is where the things we're trying to put together, like the monkey frog person, that's where that's happening. Genetic research, experimentation, mutilations, all happening on level 6. We want to make sure we can put the genes together in order to like play God and start puzzle piece and bits and bobs of humans and frogs and monkeys all together. I'm exhausted, and we still have one more level. Level 7 is where the hybrid program allegedly happened. This is where the voices get lowered. This is where when people started talking about it, they would talk in whispers, because now we have somebody named Costello allegedly claiming that he was seeing humans in cages down here. People were drugged or sedated and they were being operated on. They were being mutilated. They would have things implanted into them. There were splices of genes that were being created to alter DNA. There were hybrid children from alien beings and human beings growing in tanks. There were almost every race that you can think of in these tanks, but not just the human race. We're talking about things like reptilians, the Greys. All these types of like classic aliens that you can think of were being operated on and studied in level 7. And this wasn't just about research, this was about reproduction. This was a breeding program. Don't forget. Allegedly, these off planet beings needed a way to combine human DNA with their own DNA to create a viable hybrid species because they destroyed their own races. Okay. And, it's just normal security offices and staff in the beginning. And then you keep going and it gets a bit more clinical, and you're thinking, okay, yeah, you would expect something like that from a US government type of situation. And then it gets exponentially worse. We're talking about spiritual, invasive operations and experimentation, mind control, psychic research, manipulation. It's biological and it's intrusive, and you can bet your sweet ass cheeks that not one person had consent to do what they were doing. Tea break, because oh my god, dude. So let's now talk about what the Dulce hybrid program allegedly was. And I'm going to give you the darkest version of this story because there are so many holes and alleys and in dark corners of this entire conspiracy theory. It would be 6 hours long if I sat here and talked about everything I found, okay? The Greys, this guy right here, the Greys, they weren't just visiting Earth, okay? They were fucking dying. The Greys as a species had allegedly damaged themselves genetically so bad that they had lost their reproductive ability. And other types of stories say that they were cloned for so long that their DNA basically just degraded and they weren't able to reproduce. So there's also another kind of like string theory out there that says the Greys are actually future humans that are coming back to repair themselves by harvesting old human DNA. It goes every which fucking corner and which way you can imagine. So we're going to pick a lane and stick here. So bottom line, the Greys needed us. They needed us for biology, not for friendship. Sad day for Greys because we're pretty fucking cool if you ask me. Human eggs, sperm, embryos, wombs, hormones, nervous systems, and emotions. Remember we were talking about that soul not too long ago? So people often reported reproductive themes in abduction cases, right? So obviously we've got the classic things like there was medical exams being done to people. Missing time was a big one. We've talked about that before. People claimed that they were experiencing pregnancy-like circumstances, or men started remembering that they were essentially taking sperm from them, and egg retrieval for women. Then we take a turn into what the fuckville for the 5th time. And abductees started claiming that they were being shown strange looking children. And these claims are essentially the abductees saying that they were being shown their own children based on the hybridization program. Imagine being under hypnosis. Imagine you're laying on this little couch in the therapist's office, right? And he goes, "What do you see?" And suddenly you are seeing your own kid, but they kind of look like that. Kill it with fire? Absolutely not. So now we're back to why are they taking the genetic material? And the Dulce conspiracy theory tells us that the reason why the Greys were taking the genetic material is because they wanted to live. They were taking genetic material from cows, us, and other types of beings because they were creating hybrids so that they could live on, which is why some of these creatures looked almost human, but maybe had oversized eyes, or maybe they had like slits for a nose. A lot of abductees started describing them as emotionally empty or lacking a soul. Some even said that the children would communicate telepathically. Now, I want you to imagine this, because if you're a mom, you understand that there's a type of like sense that comes with being a mom. I don't know because I don't have it. I have fucking dogs and that's it. But I can imagine when you see your child, that does something to you physically, right? Even women who had never been a mother, if they were being abducted and they come back with the story about how they saw some children, they're saying when they were taken, they were shown these hybrid-like children, and they would recognize something on this child, and the child would look at them back with recognition in their eyes, almost like they knew each other or had seen them before. Horrifying. Because now these same women are kind of reporting later down the line almost like a postpartum depression, and saying, I'm depressed, I couldn't save my child from this terrible program that's been going on. Be so fucking for real. So psychologically, it was horrifying for a lot of women outside of just being abducted. So now you have this extra layer. So I mean, what if somebody took your DNA and made a child that you were never allowed to see or mother or father? You had all of these protective instincts, but you couldn't really fully understand why you had them, and all you have is this flashback memory of a child that looked weird as fuck that you felt like you should protect but couldn't. Oh my god. What a violation, you know? So somewhere down the line, this whole thing got really, really violent, as if it wasn't violent enough, right? Because now we have this war that broke out between human beings, or like military personnel essentially, and the aliens themselves that were part of the hybrid program. According to the conspiracy, something went wrong inside of the base. And there are different versions of this, but the most famous version says that humans and aliens had an agreement. The US government allegedly allowed the aliens to operate underground and conduct the research they were conducting in exchange for technology. We wanted technology. We wanted to have the things and the advances that these other civilizations already have. And boy, did we get it. You talk about the big boom in technology where suddenly we're as a civilization allowed to have things like this. Can you imagine? If we're able to have an iPhone, what does the US government have? So something happened, right? And the conspiracy says that the humans, the military, the US government discovered that the aliens were doing more than what was agreed on. So there was something like too many abductions happening, or too many experiments, and too many humans being taken, because now this is a full-blown subject that people talk about constantly. The entire nation had been talking about it at this point because there were so many sightings, and the aliens allegedly were taking way too many people, because now it's a whole thing. And the government had to double down on the denial. They don't want a question to exist, right? So when the military tried to intervene, this alliance shattered completely. And this is what caused the so-called Dulce War. So some versions involve Delta Force, others involve like just base security. And later there are like little bits of reptilians sprinkled in there, which I don't doubt there was, but there are also reports that dozens of soldiers died, like specialty operation soldiers died. So now after this war, we've got people like John Lear, and John Lear is a famous UFO conspiracy figure. He's also a pilot. So he kind of talks about his experiences within the UFO community, and talks about how like he had government experiences and military experiences. But then there's a man called Phil Schneider. Mic drop moment, dude. I fucking love this guy. He was badass as fuck, okay? Schneider claimed he was involved in constructing an underground base near Dulce, Dulce Base, in 1979, and encountered hostile non-human beings underground. He is saying, yeah, I was there. I helped to build it. I helped design the Dulce Base. He is so outspoken about it. His version of this war includes some sort of firefight. He actually has injuries, although people will say it's not from this base, obviously. And he talks about a lot of death happening in the Dulce Base. What's interesting about Phil Schneider was his physical injuries that he would show off at when he was talking on TV or at these events about his experiences at Dulce. He had injuries that he would show off. You know, skeptics are always going to be around, and they argue that there are alternate explanations for those injuries. because there's no records of this battle. But in UFO culture, Schneider kind of became like this martyr of the community because he later died by, wait for it, self exit. Absolutely not. If you go back and you watch Phil Schneider speak at these events, almost every single time he's saying, I am not a person who would self exit. I am not a person who has dark thoughts. I am perfectly healthy. My mind is here. I will not be exiting on my own. This guy is whistleblowing left, right, and center. And the US government would like you and me to believe that he unsubscribed from life. Give me a break, dude. If you look into that, by the way, he was admitted into a hospital for, I think it was a heart condition at one point. And this is how the US government would like you to believe that Phil Schneider passed away, right? By self exit. They are saying he was in the hospital and he unsubscribed from life. No. Go look those pictures up. Phil Schneider had cords wrapped around his neck, and he had physical injuries of him fighting somebody off, like defense marks he had all over his body. And they're saying that he schmung himself from one of the medical cords. Kid. No, absolutely not. Don't believe that. No, no, no. Schneider talked about how many people died during that battle, right? So if, say, 60 people fought in this war against aliens underground in Dulce, where are those families? Where are the records? What were the families of the soldiers told? And where are the rest of them? Where are the missing soldiers? Because there are soldiers that took part in this battle allegedly and just went missing. Where are the leaks? Where are the whistleblowers? And the trap is like, if we wanted to look for answers into this, where do you look? Where do you look? There's no records. There's no bodies. There's no photos. There's witnesses, but they're all silenced or threatened. So it just kind of protects itself. But Dulce has not died. This is a story that has very much been carried down almost generationally, as if it were lore, but there's too much truth around it and there's too much evidence for it to be real, but we just can't prove. It's just been mutated along the way. So now we have discussions about it, right? So the internet exists, and we are in this day and age where we have Reddit and UFO forums, and people still discuss Dulce like it's unfinished business, because it is. And there are some threads that debate the alleged Dulce battle and underground facilities, and users will bring up something called three invasions, which would be competing military factions, shadow government narratives, and New World Order themes. But other Reddit discussions focus on whether Phil Schneider was credible, with users arguing over his injuries, his death, and whether his story was embellished or fabricated. But now you get people who are a part of this type of like UFO tourism, and people will go to these places, right? You heard about the Storm Area 51 whole debacle. People are interested and they want to know the truth. So they end up driving or going, visiting these places where they say they see things like unmarked white trucks or classic, the vibes were off, man. But the one thing that people have in common when they're visiting a place like Dulce is they say that the locals seem like they are keeping everything hush hush, like they know more than they're saying. One Reddit comment actually describes seeing around 100 or more unmarked white trucks while they were visiting there, but they had strange little flags on the vehicles. Obviously, this doesn't prove or disprove anything, but it just shows like how this legend or this conspiracy just stays relevant by people kind of putting their sightings into modern works. So let's bring it back to reality for a bit, because we talked about a whole lot of allegedlys, right? But there are very real things that are a part of this story that are realistic. This is reality proven things. So here's where we bring it back, right? Because Project Gas Buggy was real. That whole operation where they detonated nuclear bombs underground in Dulce, that was real. There is documentation. The military secrecy in New Mexico was real. We have a whole town that was told nothing about what the military was doing there. The secrecy was real. They were told absolutely nothing about the presence of the military being there. This Cold War paranoia was real. We talked about this in our MK Ultra episode. People were freaked out because of the state of the world and the state of the country. So that panic was already there. Then you add on things like cattle mutilation, which was real, physically happening. This was all real. And the disinformation that happened between the discrediting of Paul Bennewitz and these other military personnel coming out to say, we drove that man crazy. Again, all real accounts. And we know that the military does have underground bases. That's pretty on par for governments all over the world to have. We know that the military tunnels are real. There's classified aerospace programs that exist. The US government has lied before. They have been caught lying before, and this doesn't prove if aliens or breeding projects are real, but we know that there is little to trust there. Dulce is built on a foundation of things that are true. The government kept secrets. The military projects were happening, and they were happening underground. People have been experimented on without consent. Cows have been mutilated. Nuclear testing was contaminating things. All of these things that we just talked about. And once you accept these truths, the foundation of what is happening in Dulce, it becomes increasingly more difficult to deny otherworldly partnerships. In the end, we are left with 3 versions of the Dulce Base. And one is the version number 1, the believer version. Dulce Base is real. Aliens and humans were working together. Hybrid children were created. Then the alliance collapsed. People died underground because there was this war. And does this base still exist, or was it moved? Version 2 is the skeptical version. Dulce is a modern myth created from cattle mutilation panic, hypnosis, UFO subculture, hoaxes, and media disinformation. And then we have somewhere in between, version 3. Dulce is not real in the literal sense, but something real was hidden inside of this story. Maybe Paul Bennewitz was seeing classified military action. Maybe cattle were being studied by the US government or aliens. Maybe UFO stories were seeded to make the government less sus. Maybe version number 3 is still being produced by the military because it keeps people guessing and questioning rather than having solid anything. So in the end, we are left with the government telling us, do not look under the mesa. What's under that mesa? Guys, this was one hell of a deep dive for me to take. I am so glad that one of you suggested that I look into this. This was one of those conspiracy theories that I've heard about before, but it's been so long that I've talked about it. It almost feels like I'm back in my 20s and I'm high as fuck talking to some of my best friends about the crazy shit that the US government does. And that just... If you've made it this far, thank you so much for listening. I had a blast on this one. If you wouldn't mind leaving a like or a comment, that would be amazing. Subscribe to the podcast. If you are interested in hearing one extra episode a week, please consider becoming a paid subscriber because that tier will get you one extra episode a week. And obviously, this is for us to expand on. So I want to hear your thoughts. I want to hear your feedback. I hope you're not listening to this at night. Otherwise, sleep tight. I love you all so much. Boop Shay! Thank you for being here. Thank you for supporting me. This is, like I've said, a dream come true, and I am so thrilled to be doing this with you guys. So thank you very much. I'll see you on the next one. Tell me what else you guys want to hear, and I'll let you go. Bye, Daddy.